Director of Corporate Relations and International Programs. Thank you so much for joining us for today's teleconference. Just to give a little bit of background, for over 10 years, the NGLCC has really been committed to serving as the direct link between LGBT businesses, corporate America, and the federal government. And we've really had much more of a domestic focus. And we've made some serious progress, I think, on that mission. But over the next several years, we're really going to be expanding that vision beyond just U.S. borders to increase opportunities for LGBT businesses in the United States to connect with the global LGBT business community. And this work's already been started. Many of you on the call probably are aware of our trade missions and chambers formed in Argentina and in Colombia. There's also been the development of a certification for Canadian LGBT-owned businesses that's based entirely on the NGLCC Supplier Diversity Initiative. So we're excited about all of those, that important foundational work that we've done. And we really believe that the next logical step is to better connect our LGBT business enterprises with diverse businesses in Mexico. So once you hear some of the information that Linda Caruso from U.S. Commercial Services has to share, I think you'll see where we're coming from on that. And that's really the topic of this teleconference, of course, is to give you an overview of the Mexican economy, specific industry opportunities that are available, and then how your business can directly benefit from our third international trade mission, which will be leading a delegation of U.S.-based LGBT and also allied-owned businesses to Mexico City, March 11th through the 14th. So with a little bit of that background, I'm really thrilled to introduce Linda Caruso. She's a Principal Commercial Officer for U.S. Commercial Service in Mexico. She's based in Guadalajara, but's been working really closely with her colleague Rebecca Torres in Mexico City, who's also on the line, to help prepare us for this trade mission. And so Linda's going to be doing the formal presentation, but I'm hopeful that Rebecca can help chime in with some local tips and insights into Mexico City as well throughout the next hour. But before I turn it over to Linda to give you more insights into the Mexican economy and some specific opportunities in different industry sectors, I did just want to share a couple housekeeping notes for those of you that are on our call. First, we are recording this call, so FYI, and we want to make sure that the recording as well as the slide deck that you all should have received just a few moments ago from Maureen Edwards is available to any of those folks that couldn't join us on the call today. And if you have not received that slide deck, please email us at exporting@nglcc.org, and we'll make sure to get it to you. So I think with that, I'd love to turn it over to Linda to go through just the vast amount of information and exciting opportunities that we're seeing throughout Mexico.
Thanks, Joanna. Hola, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be on the call. I'm talking to you from Guadalajara, and I arrived in Mexico about 9 months ago. So I've lived just about every season so far, and my experience has been so much better than I ever anticipated. It's really an exciting time to be here in Mexico. Today, almost on a daily basis, I see the newspapers calling it the Mexican moment. And from what I can tell, the outlook for the economy, it just keeps getting better. So I'll give you more detail as we go forward. I'm sure you'll be briefed in full once you arrive in Mexico City, should you decide to participate on the trade mission, about the major reforms that the Mexican government is moving ahead on. There's about a dozen or so reforms that the Mexican government, it's a newly installed Mexican government, is moving ahead on to stimulate the economy. But all of these are serving to really stimulate the economy and I think create opportunities for U.S. exporters. So what I'm about to do is to describe the general economic conditions in Mexico and maybe talk a little bit about our role as the U.S. government, the Department of Commerce, in providing you with information and resources that will help you to establish your company in Mexico. But my first slide is really meant, the next slide is really meant to discuss face head-on what might be your notions about what to expect when visiting Mexico. So the next slide says how people view Mexico. And yes, I'm afraid I had those same thoughts. So if you take a look at the slide, you think mariachi, tequila, but also the insecurity issues and immigration issues, etc. Our newspapers carry a lot of the bad news, and frankly, I didn't see much of the good news, although that's changing recently. So I had the same concerns, and you know, I'm from Chicago. Maybe you can tell by my accent, but I learned in Chicago the hard way how important it is to blend in, dress to blend in, don't wear flashy jewelry, getting home at a reasonable hour, and paying close attention to my surroundings. And I think, you know, with just some common sense, security, precautions, that you have nothing to worry about in Mexico. So it's an issue like it is in every big city. The State Department puts out travel and alert warnings on a web page. It's travel.state.gov, and they can answer your questions about travel safety, or we can answer any of your questions. One example is the Mexican state of Michoacan that they're telling us not to go to. So unless you're in the avocado growing industry, then we don't have to go to Michoacan to find good opportunities for you. And if you stick to the major commercial and tourist spots of Mexico, you'll be fine, you'll be safe. That said, the reality of Mexico today is just so much more. So if you would move to the next slide, we can talk about the Handicrafts of Mexico today, which might be a surprise to you. So I don't know how many of you on the line knew that Mexico is now the fourth largest auto exporter in the world. They're the #1 producer of refrigerators and flat-screen TVs in the world. So as far as white goods are concerned, they're big. They have a vibrant and growing aerospace and aviation industrial cluster. They also export beer, the #1 exporter in the world of beer, and the #4 provider of IT services in the world. So Mexico is getting busy designing and building products for tomorrow. And they're relatively young workforce, so demographics are pointing to very, positive demographics for young workforce. They're kicking into high gear, and they're exhibiting a lot of innovativeness and creativity that to me has been very impressive. If you move to the next slide, we're putting a few basic economic statistics together to show you how big the market is in Mexico. 118 million people. It's actually the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. It has relatively low unemployment, but those numbers don't reflect the workforce in the informal economy. So, and a relatively low inflation rate. Their GDP growth, which is interesting, shows that it pretty much reflects the health of the U.S. economy. When our GDP goes down, Mexican GDP goes down, and vice versa. So because our U.S. Economic growth is slated to go up in 2014, we have revised figures for 2014 to be at about 4% growth, which is very healthy. And you'll see that a lot of investment takes place, U.S. investment takes place in the Mexican economy. So U.S. interests have about 58% of foreign direct investment in Mexico. And not only that, but 1 million Americans, more than 1 million Americans live in Mexico. A lot of people have decided to retire here in Mexico. Outside of Guadalajara, there's a huge expat community of about 150,000 Americans. And so it just seems to me that we're becoming tied, the U.S. and Mexico, closer and closer. Visitors going back and forth. It's amazing how many, more than 10 million Americans visit Mexico every year, and I think 12 million Mexicans visit America. So besides visiting and exchanging, knowledge about our culture, A lot of U.S. companies, more than 18,000 we've counted, have invested in operations in Mexico with investments up to $150 billion since the year 2000. So it's a country that's very important to the United States. More than half of U.S. States have Mexico in either their first target market for exports or second target market for exports. So 29 states export more than $1 billion worth of goods and services to Mexico. So if you are seriously considering Mexico, you would be in good company by joining the trade mission to Mexico City. So if you would move to the next slide, just another quick word about our trade relationship between the U.S. and Mexico. It's been a very long, healthy, and intertwined relationship. So 14 states have Mexico in their top 5 for exports. Our bilateral trade is interestingly very evenly accrued for both U.S. and Mexico. That means that, pretty much the same amount of exports flow out as flow in from Mexico between the two countries. And I wanted to mention services because often when we talk about trade, we're talking about manufactured goods, but services is hugely important to the U.S. economy, and you'll see that on the next slide. But services sector is important to the U.S. economy because nearly 25 billion of U.S. service exports go to Mexico, and it's a huge amount. So we've counted some statistics that about 50,000 small to medium-sized enterprises are already exporting close to $41 billion worth of goods to Mexico. And there's room for growth. There's plenty of room for growth. So if you would move to the next slide, more about Mexico, and I want to stress the main reason that we're recommending Mexico is, besides the trade and economic growth figures, if that hasn't convinced you, we're close neighbors. I've traveled a couple times back home to Chicago from Guadalajara, and I marvel at the families on the plains. They look just like our families in the United States. They dress, act, and they switch from English to Spanish at the drop of a hat. So it gives me a sense that our border is disappearing. And our shared culture really makes communicating in Mexico relatively easy. So, of course, it's easier if you speak Spanish, but whether you speak Spanish or not, you'll be surprised at the amount of shared references we have. Mexicans' familiarity with U.S. culture is deep and broad. And there's also, it's important to think about the affinity, the warmth that Mexicans have for U.S. people, that and products. U.S. products are considered high quality and innovative, and everything that the Mexican consumer wants. Usually, it's the key that they compare to is it the same as the U.S. product. So you don't find that type of open arms, open market in every place in the world. So it's really all designed to support your decision to move into Mexico. And if you would move to the next slide, I'm going to just say a couple words about NAFTA. NAFTA, we're celebrating now 20 years of the trade agreement between U.S., Canada, and Mexico called NAFTA, and it created the biggest market free trade area in the whole world. So 450 million people, 1.7 trillion or 17 trillion dollars in GDP. NAFTA partners, Mexico and Canada, account for over 1/3 of U.S. total exports. We export about 15% to Mexico and 20% to Canada, so 35% altogether. Mexico is an important counter-seasonal source for many of our fruits and vegetables in the United States, and U.S. farmers and ranchers are finding Mexico a great destination for their corn, apples, sugar, soybean, etc. So NAFTA has served to really create a huge marketplace that has benefited, and according to a lot of the headlines I've read lately, mostly the United States. So why not take advantage of something that continues to bring advantages to the U.S. as a U.S. exporter? The next slide, just one more word about NAFTA. That NAFTA, it was the first trade agreement that set the standard for all other trade agreements that follow. And what it did for us is stabilize the business environment so that we have a business environment when you're doing business in Mexico and in Canada, but in Mexico that results, it's predictable and it's navigable, so you will understand how to do business here and to invest and to sell and to grow, because there's no shortage of support mechanisms and common understanding with regards to legal, investment, and environmental issues. And that's a huge plus where in other parts of the world you won't find this common understanding. So the next slide, maybe you're thinking, what about China? What about Brazil? You know, there have been a lot of headlines about doing business in those places, and I think this fad is over, but just maybe last year, the headlines were all about the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Well, actually, we export more to Mexico than all of the BRIC countries combined. And I think that the one statistic to take away from this slide that I found very interesting is that the ease of doing business in Mexico it's twice as easy than doing business in China. So it's really, the ease of doing business just says, you know, how easy is it to set up and begin conducting business, and it's really a lot easier, probably the next easiest over Canada, and maybe it's just as easy, but because of a language barrier, it would be somewhat of a, I mean, in Mexico, that's the only issue that you have to contend with. So the next slide, I want to talk to you about the U.S. government's role in working with U.S. exporters. We are we're the Commercial Service, part of the Department of Commerce. We were established in the early 1980s, around 1982, with a mandate by Congress to help U.S. exporters expand into international markets. They call us the best kept secret in government, which we're not quite proud of, but we know that we do a good job because we poll every single client, and the rates of satisfaction are in the 90s, high 90s. So, but in addition to matchmaking, every year we publish research that describes the top 10 best prospects in the 72 countries in the U.S. embassies around the world where we have offices. You can download the guide. It's called the Country Commercial Guide that posts these best prospects. We call it the CCG because everything in government has an acronym, right? But we have a market research library at our export.gov website. But in Mexico, we had a big problem because we couldn't limit the opportunities to just 10 prospects. There's too many opportunities. So for our CCG, our Country Commercial Guide for 2013, we listed 19 best prospects, and those are the ones that you see on this slide. But in the next slide, I'm only going to go into a couple of the sectors that you see here, and you can read more in depth about any of these in our Country Commercial Guide at export.gov. You can just look for the Market Research Library and then download it for yourself. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to highlight the fact that the U.S., I recently learned, is the top exporter in services in the world. And then if you go to the next slide, The reason why Mexico is important here is because they're number 5 of our top 10 destinations for services exports. So if you are in the services sector and you're thinking about expanding internationally, Mexico is a hot spot right now for expanding. And I'm going to talk about, if you would go to the next slide, just a couple of the sectors in the services sector that are highlighted in our top prospects. And the first one is education and training, and this is a sector that is receiving quite a bit of attention recently, especially since President Obama and President Peña Nieto first met in May of last year. The two administrations agreed when they met to launch a program. It's called 100,000 Strong in the Americas, and its aim is to stimulate student exchange. So both ways, they're looking for more students from Mexico and the U.S. and vice versa, and because they want to build a highly skilled future workers for high-tech companies, and the skills specifically that they're targeting besides language include engineering, environmental science, and robotics. So there's, I've noticed that there's a lot of dual degree programs being formed by higher education institutions and two-way exchanges not only of students but also teachers between U.S. and Mexico. So if you would move to the next slide. We were just talking today in our office about franchises. And franchising is a huge opportunity for U.S. exporters because it's important to the Mexican marketplace. The Mexican government also understands the importance to the economy of the franchise sector, so they developed a program that will financially support small and medium-sized entrepreneurs who want to open franchises. And there's some of the industries that the franchises include, and the top one is definitely food and beverage, but there's other industries there. And it's important to note that franchise brands, most of them, 80% of the franchises that you see here in Mexico are Mexican ideas, Mexican concepts. But the U.S. is the next largest with 10% of the market share. And I attribute that to the fact that there's so many visitors back and forth that they're recognizable brands. So when you come here, you're apt to find many of the same stores if it's a franchise that you would see back home in the United States. And here's where we can provide a lot of value when we're providing market feedback for companies that our local staff are local. So they've been here for long term. We've got one of my colleagues here who's fortunately going to be retiring this year after 25 years of service. And my last post, same thing. I think the shortest time that one of our local staff was in our office in Poland was 17 years. So what they do is develop a very broad and deep reach and knowledge of sectors. We assign them particular sectors. So they have quite a Rolodex on their desk, and they're able to contact and tap into the market in a way that I think if you're new to the country or new to the city, that you wouldn't be able to do. So we give you our feedback. We collect feedback from the marketplace, and we help just to make sure that when you enter the market, that you're not wasting your valuable time to push a product that is going to fall flat in the marketplace. So we give you our feedback, and that's what you would get from filling out one of the questionnaires and asking, whether or not your product would be suitable for the Mexican market. So if you would move to the next slide, tourism and travel is booming right now. Mexico is, in the United States, it represents 20% of our total foreign arrivals. We keep breaking records every year of the number of visits, as well as the number of, as well as the amount of money spent. So it's already surpassed the $10 billion mark for Mexican visitors in the United States, and that figure in 2013, I don't think is expected to grow 2%, and it'll probably grow another 2% in 2014, if not more. So travel and tourism is, right now we have huge opportunities. If you would move to the next slide. Mexico, I think that's all I'm going to talk about as far as services sectors are concerned, but if you, like I said, have any questions, we can talk to you at the end of the call, or you can send your questions to us or Joanna, and we'd be happy to fill in any of the gaps. I wanted to talk just a couple minutes about Mexican market entry strategies. And if you think about it, Mexico has 3 time zones. It's a big country, and most small businesses need multiple reps to cover the distinct regions of Mexico. Relationship building is key, and if you decide to come on the NGLCC Trade Mission to Mexico City, I hope that it's just the first of many of your trips to Mexico, because in order to be successful in international business, you need to build your relationships, and relationships take time. Relationships take a lot of face time, so multiple visits are key, as well as visits to the various parts of countries, various part of the country around to develop the regions. So the next slide is about the Mexican business culture, and it's interesting because, you know, everything that we can tell you about the Mexican business culture, you could probably find an exception. Mexico City is a very international and cosmopolitan business culture. Guadalajara is maybe just a tad bit more conservative, and you kind of take a step back in time when you're doing business in Guadalajara. But the one thing that surprised me when I was doing my research about doing business in Mexico is it seems to me that the Mexicans are on par with the Japanese in their inability to say no. So you might hear yes, yes, but to discern whether their yes really means did we have a deal, or they're just being polite, takes a bit of practice. So it just you know, usually what I use is if they ask clarifying questions, and that means to me that they want to say no, but they can't say no, so they just keep asking more questions. So that's just one of the tips that I use, and maybe Rebecca at the end of our call can pop in and tell us more about what, you know, when does no mean no in the Mexican business culture. Next slide, we're just bringing up the topic of finance, which could be the difference between clinching the deal or not. Mexican economic conditions, really, their lending rates are high, from 9 to 14%, and ours is about 3 or now maybe 4%. So sometimes we as U.S. exporters, it doesn't matter where you go, we don't realize that we have the keys in our hand. We have a lot of leverage when it comes to offering attractive payment terms. Attractive payment terms just could mean the difference between landing the deal or not, or losing it. So I want to recommend the Small Business Administration as a resource for you. Likely they have an office near you in the U.S. because many of them are co-located in our 100 offices, the commercial service offices near you. And we can put you in touch with someone from the Small Business Administration who can talk about the various products that we have if you're considering, you know, using some financial products to help gain that kind of leverage with your international client. So the next slide gives you a picture of what Mexico looks like. Like I said, 3 time zones. It's big. And, for example, the distance between Guadalajara and Mexico City, where that big red dot is, takes about, well, it depends on how you drive, maybe anywhere from 6 to 8 hours to drive to Mexico City from Guadalajara. And I took the liberty of putting those dots there. The red dot is Mexico City, where our U.S. Embassy is and where the Trade Mission is going. The other 2 blue dots are where we have 2 more offices. The Commercial Service has one in Monterrey and one in Guadalajara. And the major commercial centers include the border region, so Chihuahua, Tijuana, Ciudad Juarez, and Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey. So those are the major commercial centers. The next slide is just a very, very brief description of Mexico City. What can you say about Mexico City? It's one of the most populous cities on the face of the earth. It's a perfect place to start for you. It's a city with kind of an American feel because it's a big international city. So I love how Rebecca Torres refers to it as the Manhattan south of the border. It's the country's financial and political capital. It's cosmopolitan and very fast-paced. So let's put it this way: you're far more likely to see people in Mexico City wearing European suits and high fashion and high-heel shoes than sombreros. So Mexico City, I wanted to tell you also, or they call it DF, the capitalization for Distrito Federal, is at 7,900 feet, so it's at a high altitude. So when you get there, it's important that you take it easy. And very briefly, gay Mexico. Mexico is very gay-friendly. It was one of the first cities in Mexico to legalize same-sex marriage. That was in 2010. And cities and states around the country have followed suit. Just recently in Guadalajara, they conducted the first same-sex marriage. I think that was 2012, the very end of 2012. So it has several gay districts, a gay scene that has dozens of gay-friendly bars, restaurants. And it's like every other big city. Mexico City has dangers, and so, same-sex PDA might provoke unfriendly reactions just like it does in other U.S. cities. So the next slide, I wanted to let you know that our contact information is here in the slide deck, and Rebecca would be your host during the trip to Mexico City. And if I'm lucky, I'll be able to come too. But I'm in Guadalajara, and if you would like to find out, about the difference between the markets between Guadalajara and Mexico, I'm always available to chat or converse with you by email or phone. The next slide is my last slide, and I wanted to just share the links. Excuse me. I just wanted to just share the links that you could download information for yourself from our Mexican offices or all the other offices around the world. And I encourage you to look at the pages of our websites. But before I turn the floor over to Joanna, I just want to tell you how much admiration I have for the NGLCC and their mission. And by extension, if you participate in the mission, it really enhances the betterment of the business community in Mexico. Personally speaking, my partner and I have been together 10 years, and we've been totally accepted and welcomed in the greater Guadalajara community, and including the business community. We've had nothing but positive experiences, and we've made lifetime friendships in the short time I've been here. I'm still going to be here for another 4 years. So, but the opportunity that you have to meet other LGBT leaders on this trip from around the world during the trade mission really supports the goals of the NGLCC to build a global LGBT community, and that helps. It also helps you develop into a better global citizen. So thank you, Joanna, for walking the talk. Thank you, NGLCC, for putting substance behind the objectives to make the world more LGBT friendly. Thanks, Joanna.
Thank you so much, Linda. I'm like tearing up over here. that was.
I mean it.
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you so much for all the information that you shared. I think you did such a comprehensive and great job of answering the question, why are we going to Mexico next? Like, why does this really make sense for many small and medium-sized businesses which we typically represent? Of course, we also have very large LGBT businesses as well that are already working internationally. But those low barriers to entry is really a crucial reason for coming to Mexico and for really connecting our businesses across the borders. So thanks again for all of that information. And I know you're going to stay on the line so that you can help answer questions that we might get in from callers. But I would be certainly remiss if I didn't give you more insight into what the actual trade mission looks like. For those of you who have not participated in a trade mission or maybe aren't familiar with how the NGLCC does trade missions, because of course we do things a little differently, and I'd like to say more fun. But if you'll continue through the slide deck, we have just kind of a brief overview of the agenda, starting with Tuesday, March 11th, which is really, it's going to be a travel day for most of our delegates, but depending on when you arrive, we would encourage anyone who's in town early enough to take advantage of the strategic location of our host hotel, which is the Hilton Mexico City Reforma, and that's located in the Reforma district. And Rebecca, if you're still on the line.
Oh yeah, I'm still here. I didn't mean to interrupt Linda because she was covering everything so well. I just didn't want to interrupt the flow. But yes, where your hotel is, the Reforma area I think it's an ideal location because you're kind of halfway between Chapultepec Park, which is kind of our version of Central Park, and the historic district where you have the Zócalo and the National Palace and some cathedrals and the Templo Mayor, which is an Aztec temple that was accidentally unearthed when they were building a new subway stop. So your location is wonderful to explore all ends of the city. So kudos to Joanna for picking that one out.
Well, I can't take full credit for that. We actually have to give a shout-out to Site Search and Select. They're one of our LGBT BEs that's going to be joining us on the trade mission, and they're helping us with a lot of our the meeting planning aspect. And they found that wonderful hotel, so we're really excited to visit one of our corporate partners in Mexico City. And so that first day, though, all of our delegates, we really will encourage to participate in a welcome reception to get to know one another and kind of start off the trade mission on a really great foot. The next day, Wednesday, the 12th, is really going to be a pretty packed day, and that's the case, I think, for the next 3 days overall. Wednesday is our big day with commercial services, so you'll see lots of Rebecca on Wednesday, the 12th, and hopefully Linda as well. This is the opportunity where an economic and cultural briefing will be presented, kind of building on the information that you heard this afternoon from Linda on specific industry opportunities based on the what our delegation looks like, which companies are participating. We'll be able to tailor it a bit, and then going into a little bit more detail as well on business etiquette in Mexico and how really to prepare for the matchmaker meetings that will then take place throughout the rest of the day. So the matchmaker meetings, to kind of turn to that, this is part of the Gold Key service that Commercial Services offers. It's just an unbelievable opportunity where by completing a brief questionnaire, which we've been sharing through social media and through email, but we can also send to you after this call as well if you don't have it, complete a brief questionnaire about your capabilities and what you're really looking to do and how you'd like to expand in Mexico. And as Linda was sharing earlier, their experts within the area can really point you in the right direction and give you honest feedback about how well your product or service would be received, what kind of other competition there are, who your best partners or end users or distributors might be. And those matchmaker meetings are meant to allow you to meet with those individuals that could then become your on-the-ground partners, which is just unbelievable opportunity and access. Many of the times, depending on the company and the size of the company, They may have English speakers that are able to meet with you. If not, we definitely want to reassure you that translators will be provided, and so that's all part of the package. And that Wednesday is going to be full of all of your business meetings, depending on what kind of opportunities there are for your specific company. Then Thursday, if you want to head to the next slide, this is also going to be a rather full day in that we're really excited to be able to allow our delegates to take advantage of the partnerships that the NGLCC has formed with Pro Mexico, which is a trade promotion agency in Mexico, with the International Gay and Lesbian Travel Association, or IGLTA, as many of you know it. We Connect International, which is a body that works with women-owned businesses across the globe and certifies those businesses, as well as LGBT Confex, which hosts an annual LGBT Business Expo each year in Mexico. And then, of course, we're also going to be working and leveraging the work that we've done with our corporate partners that have operations throughout the country. And together, we're going to come up with a rather robust schedule of programming of educational seminars around building your business across borders. So that's not going to that one-day conference of sorts that's part of the trade mission overall will be available to U.S. delegates as well as to Mexican diverse businesses throughout Mexico. So with a specific focus, of course, on our LGBT businesses and allied businesses. And we're really excited about that opportunity. So there's going to be a lot of networking that can take place throughout the day. We'll end that day, the kind of conference of sorts, with a corporate global diversity roundtable, which again is going to highlight the work of our corporate partners in expanding diversity and inclusion and that value across the globe. So what are they doing to ensure that they're marketing to the LGBT community across the world? What are they doing in terms of LGBT employees that are outside of the U.S.? And then most importantly to our audience, how are they trying to work with LGBT-owned businesses through supplier diversity, both inside the U.S., in Latin America, and beyond? So that's going to be a really amazing opportunity, I think, for delegates to sit in and learn from thought leaders throughout the Americas on what their D&I strategy is, their diversity and inclusion strategy, and how they're really trying to more effectively work with LGBT-owned businesses. And following that day, we'll end with a celebratory kind of reception that allows for further networking, and that's going to be hosted by IGLTA. Our last day in Mexico City as a formal delegation is going to be Friday, March 14th. And the morning will really consist of what we refer to as the LGBT Summit of the Americas. And this is something that we started back in 2012 with our trade mission to Colombia, where we bring together the affiliate leaders of all of our national LGBT chambers that work together. So in particular, this is throughout North and South America. So we have folks hopefully joining us from Canada. Of course, Justin Nelson and Chance Mitchell, the co-founders of the NGLCC, will be present for the U.S. We'll have folks from the Colombian LGBT Chamber as well as the Argentina Gay and Lesbian Chamber. And then what we're hoping for is to later this year be able to launch a chamber in Mexico. And so the future leaders and stakeholders of that Mexican LGBT chamber will be joining us for the summit as well. And all delegates for the trade mission are able to sit in on that summit, hear about some of the challenges and the best practices of growing and sustaining a national LGBT chamber, what they're facing, what their members are facing, and actually give voice to what LGBT suppliers are experiencing in the U.S. and how that might impact the programming that's available both in the U.S. and beyond. And then finally, we're excited to end the trade mission on a kind of cultural note. We're excited to do a tour of Teotihuacan. It's a multi-ethnic city of pyramids built in 100 BC, and it's been inhabited as late as 8th century AD. And so for the archaeological nerd in me, I'm really, really excited about that part of the trade mission as well. But we figure we don't want you to come to Mexico without actually experiencing the culture and the people and learn more about the history and how the country overall has grown to be such a successful place. So that's an overview of the agenda for the trade mission itself. I think, many of you might be curious as to what are next steps. So, yeah, these things sound interesting, but I'm not sure if it's a right fit for me. How would I even figure that out? So we want to make sure to make these clear for you, and if you have further questions, please do not hesitate to email us at exporting@nglcc.org or give us a call at 202-234-9181 anytime. You can ask to speak with me. I'm happy to answer your questions. But an important next step is really to complete the questionnaire that we've been talking about, answer that information, get some feedback from commercial services to see the opportunities that you might have, whether it's to actually join us on this trade mission in March, which we certainly hope that you do, or just to help you determine your overall growth strategy and your plan to begin working internationally. It's a really great opportunity that we hope you take advantage of. And then, obviously, if you do plan to participate in the trade mission, there are costs associated to help cover your hotel and the translators and all of the different programming that will be available. So the cost per company is $2,500, and that does include the Gold Key service that Commercial Services provides. If you're interested in potentially participating in the trade mission but maybe not doing the matchmaker meetings, or after speaking with Commercial Services experts, you learn there's not really a good fit, but you still want to be part of this historic trade mission, there's definitely opportunity to do that, and we can work with you on what that cost would look like. So please don't be discouraged if you don't get any matchmaker meetings. But we're confident that I think the folks on this call and some of the people that we've been reaching out to over the past several weeks are really have tremendous opportunity. An emailed question around the cost and exactly what all is covered in the $2,500, so I wanted to give a little bit more explanation about that. Your hotel nights are covered, all 4 nights, as well as your breakfast, any group activities, so the tours, the cultural tours are all covered, and ground transportation to and from any trade mission or summit-specific events. If you wanted to do any additional tours outside of that, obviously any incidentals would be up to you all, and then airfare is also your responsibility, which we think is probably the most fair since there are folks, in LA and Dallas and places that might be able to get a super cheap flight on their own. So that's the overall setup. And then I think I also mentioned that translators are also covered as part of your the package. I want to thank Linda and Rebecca so much for joining our call and for sharing this great information with our participants. And I also want to, of course, thank our participants for your interest. And to echo Justin's words, please feel free if you have questions or you're just unsure. Don't hesitate to call me, and I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations with you to tell you more about the opportunity. So with that, I'm going to close the call, but thank you again, and I look forward to leading many of you all to Mexico City in March.